There's a lot of talk about getting the perfect floor tom tone, and there are a lot of people who feel completely lost and really frustrated on that journey. While every drummer has their own preferences about tuning and muffling, what it really boils down to is controlling and manipulating sustain. There are a variety of hacks out there on this subject. They include flipping over a floor tom leg to reduce sustain, which may not work depending on the legs that you have on your drum. You'll even see taking one of the heads off and putting cotton balls inside of the drum, replacing that head and tuning it all back up again in an effort to muffle the resonant head. This is all well and good, but if you don't get it exactly right the first time in terms of the amount of cotton balls, you have to take the head off again and go through that whole process. You can't make micro adjustments, and that's pretty frustrating. Most of these methods only serve to shorten the note length, but today we're going to show you methods that allow you to control that note length and make it both shorter or longer. But that's not the best part. The best part is nothing we demonstrate today is going to require a drum key. You can set that aside. Say you've got your drum tuned how you like. It's largely behaving and sounding good, but the note's a little short, it's a little choked. Or it's singing for days and getting in the way of everything you want to play. You're not going to need to reach for a drum key to fix this. You're also not going to need a degree in applied physics. Now, before we attach balloons to our floor tom and kick off the next sequel to Up or break out the ball and chain and take this drum prisoner, let's listen to the tuning we have it at right now. Now, before we talk about that, let's look at the length of the note that we're getting out of it. We're using a 14-inch diameter floor tom today. We also have it tuned in the mid to low range, and it's already giving us a pretty satisfying amount of sustain, but we can definitely go further. Now, we're going to add isolation mounts onto each of the floor tom legs. You can think of each of these as a trampoline for the foot of the floor tom. It's cushioning it and allowing the drum to resonate more overall. Let's give this drum a listen now. Just like before, let's give a visual look at the length of the note now. If this is already starting to feel like a lot, don't worry, there's going to be a full comparison at the end of the video if you stick with us. In this moment, did you notice that the character and the sound of the floor tom remained consistent, but the sustain was the only thing that changed? By adding these isolation mounts, we've really dramatically added more sustain to the drum, but unlike muffling choices or some other additive thing to the head of the drum itself, we haven't changed its character. This is fantastic because if we were to add things to the drum head or even go to a drum key, we might be changing parts of the sound that we're already happy with. By adding isolation mounts to the legs of the floor tom rather than adding mass to the head or using a drum key, we're able to keep all the parts of the sound that we like and just manipulate the sustain. Let's take these isolation mounts off of the legs of the floor tom now because we're going in the opposite direction. If you've had a floor tom sound that you loved, except that it rang forever, but everything else was good, this is going to be the moment for you. We're going to take this drum and we're going to add a sandbag leaned against one of the legs, and it's going to completely change the behavior of this instrument. You can think of this kind of like an anchor. It is pulling the drum toward the floor and thus reducing its ability to sustain. Sounds Like a Drum is entirely viewer supported. We are not sponsored. We don't have any money coming to us from companies, and that is where you, the viewer, come in. The best way to help us continue to make these shows is the Patreon. Please follow the link below. It's the best way to support us and allow us to continue bringing content like this. Now let's take a look at the sound of this drum. At this point, we want to reiterate that if you're struggling with a really long note, it can be a really natural instinct to want to reach for a drum key or some kind of muffling for the heads. By putting something outside of the drum, it's non-invasive, it's fast. Not only can you check to see if it's working, but it's going to get you results instantly that you can take away just as fast if you don't want it anymore. For these demonstrations today, we're taking pretty big steps. We're going for a lot of isolation or a lot of anchoring it to the floor. Bear in mind that a lighter sandbag or only one isolation mount on one floor tom leg is going to give you a more subtle version of this effect. And all of this fine tuning can be done without a drum key. When you're making these kinds of adjustments to the sustain of a drum, remember that there is a rule of thumb for this kind of thing based on the musical context. High density music favors shorter, punchier sounds. More spacious music has space for longer, more drawn out sounds. These methods work regardless of what range you like to tune your drums in. And if you prefer higher tunings or are currently choosing them, we're going to explore that now too. We've tuned the floor tom up a fair bit now. Let's give a listen to it before we add anything. As another general rule, higher pitched drums fundamentally project more than lower pitched drums. This means that our needs for manipulating sustain might differ if we're tuning in this range. Let's take a look at what that sounds like. Rather than starting off with enhancing the sustain, let's begin with reducing it as we did before by adding the sandbag. By reducing the sustain in this manner, we're really diving into the punchiness already inherent in this drum, but taking some of the sustain away to make it drive the middle of the sound, the punchy part, even better without any extra sustain on the end. Just like before, let's give a visual look at the length of the note now. As before, because we haven't changed anything about the tuning or added any muffling to the heads, we're keeping all the overtones that are giving us that projection, and still a tremendous amount of tone that's allowing the fundamental sound of the drum to get out there. Conversely, we could run into an opposite problem, which is a high-pitched drum that is choking out because it's tuned high. This is a super common problem. I have run into it many times, and if you're exploring high tunings, you're guaranteed to run into it sooner or later. Let's add those isolation mounts to the legs of the floor tom again and see if we can bring back some sustain into this relatively choked sound. These isolation mounts allow us to stretch the note length, again, without changing any other part of the character of the sound. This means that if we're in an environment, no matter what it may be, where we want to hear the totality of the sound of the drum really project, we can get a lot more of it this way. Now let's look at the length of note for this iteration. The physical space that you're playing in, whether it's your bedroom or a venue or anything in between, is going to affect your needs with all of these adjustments. Remember that in a very large space, shorter sounds are going to come across as clearer, while in a smaller space, warmer and more sustainy sounds may fill that space and sound really beautiful. Remember that these are just choices that we're making here. They're based on logic and they get results, but this is where you come in as an artist, and exploring these things on your own will allow you to get what you need out of your instrument, whether it's a little bit or a lot. If this all feels really overwhelming, don't be afraid. This is fundamentally fun and is giving us a real insight into the behavior of our drums. Remember that these things take practice, there's an ear training component to it, and it's going to give you tools that you can use no matter where you play the drums or whatever kind of music you might want to make too. There's one more point that we really want to mention in the course of making these adjustments to our floor tom. Sometimes you might have a drum on your set that is behaving much differently than everything else on the kit, and you might like the sound of it, but maybe it has too much sustain, perhaps floor tom and rack tom. You can bring it in line with the rest of your drums by utilizing these techniques. You can also make it an outlier with a really unique voice that sticks out drastically from the rest of the kit if you so choose. These are exactly the artistic choices that we're talking about when we say, take what we've done here today, run with it, explore it however you want. Now we are at the point of a comparison of all of these sounds. Here we go. We went through a couple of different tunings today and were able to drastically alter the behavior of the sustain of this drum without changing the tuning or adding any muffling to the head that would risk changing the fundamental sound of it. It's no coincidence that we use these particular drums from WTS today. They allow us to change the tuning easily, and also they are extremely resonant because of their fundamental design. They give us a lot to sculpt. It's like a really big piece of marble that we're able to chip away at to get these sounds to change over time. If you're curious about any of the gear that we're using in this episode, a complete list is in the description below the video. Today, we showed you some great methods to control the note length of your drum, giving you either a shorter note or a longer note than you're currently dealing with. These methods are non-invasive, easy to apply, and will allow you to sculpt the sound of your floor tom no matter what musical environment you find yourself in.